The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. Imagine spending 39 years behind bars for a crime you did not commit. Imagine watching your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s dissolve inside a concrete cell while the real killer walks free. Now imagine that the entire case against you rested on the testimony of a single 12-year-old boy who was pressured by police into pointing his finger at you. This is the story of Ricky Jackson, the longest wrongful imprisonment in American history, and it begins on a spring afternoon in Cleveland, Ohio, when a money order turned into a death sentence. On the afternoon of May 19, 1975, a man named Harold Franks walked out of a corner store called Robinson's Cut Rate on Fairhill Road in Cleveland's East Side neighborhood. Franks was a businessman, 59 years old, carrying the day's deposit. He never made it to his car. Two men approached him in broad daylight. One threw acid in his face. The other pulled out a sawed-off shotgun and fired. Harold Franks collapsed on the sidewalk. He would die 2 days later at a local hospital from the devastating combination of chemical burns and a shotgun blast to the torso. The murder was brazen, violent, and committed in a busy neighborhood in the middle of the day. Cleveland police were under immediate pressure to find the killers. Detectives canvassed the area and quickly zeroed in on a witness, a 12-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon. Vernon told police that he had been riding a school bus that passed the scene at the moment of the attack. He said he saw the whole thing unfold through the bus window. Under intense questioning, Vernon identified 3 young men from the neighborhood: Ricky Jackson, then 18 years old, his brother Ronnie Jackson, and their friend Wiley Bridgman. All 3 were quickly arrested and charged with aggravated murder. Their lives, as they knew them, were over. What happened next was a textbook case of a justice system that valued a quick conviction over the truth. Eddie Vernon's testimony was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. In fact, it was virtually the only evidence connecting the 3 men to the crime. There was no physical evidence linking Ricky Jackson, Ronnie Jackson, or Wiley Bridgman to the murder. No fingerprints, no weapon recovered from their possession, no blood evidence, no confession. The prosecution's entire case stood on the shoulders of a child who claimed he saw the killing from a moving school bus. And the jury believed him. In 1975, Ricky Jackson was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to death. He was 18 years old, sitting on death row in the state of Ohio for a crime he swore he had nothing to do with. Ronnie Jackson and Wiley Bridgman received similar sentences. The case was closed. Cleveland detectives moved on, and 3 innocent men began the slow, excruciating process of losing everything. Ricky Jackson's death sentence was later commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to various Ohio state prisons, where he spent the next several decades watching the world change through letters and the occasional television broadcast. He watched presidents come and go. He watched technology transform daily life. He watched his youth vanish. Through all of it, he maintained his innocence. He filed appeal after appeal. Every single one was denied. The courts saw a convicted murderer. Ricky Jackson saw an innocent man trapped in a nightmare with no exit. The years ground on with a cruelty that is almost impossible to comprehend. Ricky marked his 25th birthday in prison, then his 30th, then his 40th. Friends and family members on the outside aged, moved away, or died. His mother passed while he was incarcerated. The world forgot about him. He became just another inmate, just another number in the Ohio corrections system. But Ricky Jackson never stopped insisting that Eddie Vernon had lied. And he was right. The breakthrough did not come from a DNA test or a new forensic technique. It came from a guilty conscience. In 2011, a pastor in Cleveland began working with Eddie Vernon, now a middle-aged man carrying decades of psychological torment. Vernon had become deeply religious and was struggling with what he had done as a boy. Slowly, painfully, he began to confide in the pastor. He said the testimony he gave in 1975 was a lie. He said he had not actually seen the murder from the school bus. In fact, investigators later determined that no school bus had even passed the scene at the time of the killing. The entire foundation of the prosecution's case had been a fabrication. Eddie Vernon revealed that Cleveland police detectives had coached him, pressured him, and fed him details about the crime. He was 12 years old, frightened, and had told the officers what they wanted to hear. He identified 3 men he vaguely knew from the neighborhood, not because he saw them commit a murder, but because the detectives made it clear that was what they needed him to say. Vernon carried this secret for nearly 4 decades, and the weight of it had nearly destroyed him. The Ohio Innocence Project took up Ricky Jackson's case, and attorneys began building a motion for a new trial based on Vernon's recantation. The legal process was painstaking. Recantations are treated with extreme skepticism by courts, and prosecutors initially resisted any suggestion that the conviction was flawed. But as investigators dug deeper, the case against Jackson, his brother, and Bridgman disintegrated completely. Bus records contradicted the prosecution's original timeline. Multiple witnesses from the original neighborhood came forward to say they had never seen the 3 men near the crime scene. The absence of any physical evidence became not just a gap in the case, but a chasm. On November 18, 2014, Ricky Jackson walked out of Cuyahoga County Courthouse in Cleveland a free man. He had spent 39 years, 5 months, and 19 days in prison. He was 57 years old. When he stepped through the courthouse doors into the cold November air, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters, attorneys, and journalists. He stood still for a long moment, blinking in the daylight, his face a mixture of disbelief, grief, and something that might eventually become joy. A reporter asked him how he felt. Ricky Jackson said simply, "I don't even know how to feel right now. I don't know how to be free." Ronnie Jackson was exonerated the same day. Wiley Bridgman was released shortly after. 3 men who had collectively lost over a century of their lives to a lie were finally acknowledged as innocent. The state of Ohio formally dismissed all charges. No one was ever reinvestigated or charged for the murder of Harold Franks. The real killer, whoever that person was, had gotten away with it for decades, shielded by the wrongful conviction of 3 innocent men. Eddie Vernon's recantation raised profound and uncomfortable questions about the Cleveland Police Department's conduct in 1975. How does a 12-year-old boy become the sole witness in a capital murder case? How do experienced detectives build an entire prosecution on the word of a child without a single piece of corroborating physical evidence? How does a jury sentence 3 men to death on that testimony alone? And perhaps most disturbingly, how does the system then keep those men locked away for nearly 4 decades while every appeal is denied? Ricky Jackson filed a lawsuit against the city of Cleveland for his wrongful imprisonment. In 2017, the city settled with Jackson for $18 million, the largest settlement for a wrongful imprisonment case in Ohio history. But no amount of money can restore 39 stolen years. No check can give a man back the decades he spent in a cell for something he did not do. No settlement can bring back the family members he lost, the milestones he missed, the life he should have lived. Since his release, Ricky Jackson has spoken publicly about his experience, advocating for criminal justice reform and supporting organizations that work to free the wrongfully convicted. He has spoken about the difficulty of reintegrating into a world that had fundamentally changed during his imprisonment. He has spoken about learning to use a cell phone for the first time in his late 50s, about the overwhelming sensation of walking through a grocery store, about the quiet devastation of realizing that so much of his life is simply gone. Wiley Bridgman struggled deeply after his release. Despite his exoneration, the psychological damage of spending nearly 4 decades in prison proved catastrophic. On September 14, 2016, less than 2 years after his release, Wiley Bridgman died by suicide at his home in Cleveland. He was 60 years old. His death stands as a grim reminder that wrongful conviction does not end at the prison gate. The trauma follows you. It lives in your bones. It rewires your brain. For Wiley Bridgman, freedom came too late to save him. Today, the murder of Harold Franks remains officially unsolved. The real killer was never identified, never pursued, never held accountable. 3 innocent men paid for that crime with a combined 106 years of their lives. One of them paid with his life entirely. So the question that lingers over this case is not just about Ricky Jackson. It is about the system itself. If a 12-year-old boy's coerced testimony can send 3 men to prison for nearly 4 decades, if the courts can deny appeal after appeal for 39 years, while an innocent man rots in a cell, if the real killer can walk free for half a century because police were more interested in closing a case than finding the truth, then how many other Ricky Jacksons are out there right now, sitting in cells across this country, waiting for someone to listen? How many more decades will pass before we find them? The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.